everyone, and welcome to the next lesson in National 5 Biology. We're now moving on to Key Area 2 of Unit 1, and that covers the transport across cell membrane. So we're going to start off with a little bit of a thought experiment. A diver is swimming in the ocean, they've cut their leg on some coral, and they are now bleeding. There is a shark swimming a mile away. What's going to happen to the diver? Well, the shark is going to be able to smell that diver's blood, or sense that diver's blood, and is then going to swim towards the diver, even though that diver is over a mile away from the shark, or roughly a mile away from the shark. Because, by a process that we're going to learn about, that diver's blood will mix in with the water in the ocean, and it will just continue to spread over a very, very large distance, including covering that mile. So eventually that blood will spread over a mile away, it will reach the shark, and then the shark is going to be able to sense that and sense where it's coming from. That happens by the process known as diffusion. Now, diffusion is the movement of molecules from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So if we link that back to the example of the diver in the ocean, when they are bleeding, the blood that is coming straight from their leg in the area really closely surrounding the leg will be very, very high concentration. Okay, there's a high concentration of blood and a low concentration of seawater. In comparison to that, a mile away where the shark is, there is a tiny, tiny, tiny concentration of blood. So that's a low concentration, but there is a high concentration of water. So that blood is going to move from where it is in high concentration, which is next to the diver, all the way out to where the shark is a mile away, which would be low concentration. So it's going to move from high to low. Now this is a passive process. It will just happen naturally. That blood will spread out amongst the water naturally without any outside help encouraging it or moving it along. It does not require any energy. It will just happen on its own. And this is what diffusion looks like. So we can take another example here. Let's say that inside this beaker, so in here, we have water particles. So just like the water that you would get out of your tap or water that you'd get in a water bottle. Inside the beaker, we're starting off with water particles. And then up here, we have diluting juice. Water and diluting juice. Now, just like when you're pouring yourself a glass of diluting juice, you start off with a lot of water and then a small amount of concentrated diluting juice. So this is high concentration. And then this is low concentration. So when your diluting juice is first poured in, it's initially going to gather where it's just being poured. But over time, it will spread out evenly amongst all the water particles. And eventually it will look like it does in the second picture on the right hand side. Diffusion is an incredibly important process. It is important not only for beings like ourselves, multicellular organisms, but it is also important on a unicellular standpoint. So looking at plant cells and animal cells, both of these require oxygen to enter the cell. Okay, so there is a cellular process called respiration that requires oxygen. So oxygen will move into these cells by diffusion. After this cellular process happens, carbon dioxide is produced. Now, the cells do not need carbon dioxide at this point. Especially an animal cell, it is not useful for the animal cell. So the carbon dioxide is a waste product and it will be released out of the cell, again by diffusion. But plant cells also have to undergo an additional cellular reaction, and that is called photosynthesis. That is the process by which plants make their food, and that happens in these little green guys here, the chloroplasts. So in order for photosynthesis to happen, plants require carbon dioxide. So CO2 is also going to enter the plant cell. And then, once plants are finished with the CO2, once they've finished the process of photosynthesis, they produce oxygen. So oxygen will then diffuse out of the cells as a waste product. Okay? So diffusion is incredibly important in unicellular organisms for the movement of CO2 and oxygen, O2, in and out of the cell. Now, on a multicellular organism, it's incredibly important. Diffusion is incredibly important for breathing. When we breathe in, if we take a deep breath in, what is entering our lungs is oxygen. So oxygen will come down both branches of our lungs and it will enter our respiratory system. Oxygen is then going to diffuse out of these little air bags. Okay, so our lungs have little air sacs that kind of look like grape bunches at the bottom of all these branches. So inside of those air sacs, oxygen will sit there and then it will diffuse out of them into the bloodstream. And it will then travel all around our body in our bloodstream and will eventually diffuse out of the blood and into the necessary cells. So all of the cells in our body that require oxygen, it will be delivered to them by the bloodstream using diffusion. Now, those cells will undergo respiration, and just like in the unicellular organisms, they will then produce CO2. That CO2 is going to diffuse back into the bloodstream. It will come back to these air sacs, and then it will go out of our lungs. We'll breathe it out as CO2. So diffusion is incredibly important in multicellular organisms for breathing, for when we are breathing in oxygen and breathing out CO2. But there is another important use of diffusion in multicellular organisms, and that is for digestion. So digestion, the process by which we break down our food. Now, we may have eaten like a burger, for example, and that has carbs in your bun, it has lots of fat, and it'll have protein in your meat. So you're getting all of your different food groups inside of that burger, but they all need to be broken down into a core component before they can actually be used by our body, and that is glucose. So they need to be broken down into the simple sugar glucose. Now, once that has happened, the reason that happens is because our cells need glucose to perform their important functions. Our cells need glucose to get energy. Now, our bodies need the glucose. It can't just sit in our digestive system. It needs to be able to reach all of the different cells that require it. And it does that by diffusion. So inside of our digestive system, inside of our intestines, there are these long, sticky out things called villi. And they provide a greater surface area for diffusion. And what will happen is glucose will diffuse out of these. So they'll diffuse out of the intestines and into the bloodstream. Glucose, once it has entered the bloodstream, will then circulate around just like the oxygen will until it reaches all of the cells that require it, and then it will diffuse out of the blood and into those cells, and they will then put that glucose to use. So, to summarise, diffusion is the movement of molecules from high concentration to low concentration. It is passive and does not require any energy. Diffusion allows for the movement of O2 into cells and CO2 out of cells in unicellular organisms and in multicellular organisms, and it is necessary for respiration. That is a cellular process that we will cover later. It is also important for breathing and digestion inside of animals. So diffusion is an incredibly important process that is necessary for life. Okay everyone, I hope that this lesson has helped you, whether you are learning or revising, and I will see you all in the next one on the cell membrane. Bye guys.